When my sister spoke my name that morning, she didn't say it with anger. She said it the way people do when they've already decided you're guilty. I'd spent years believing silence could keep peace in a family, that if I stayed steady, respectful, small enough, the people I loved would finally stop mistaking my calm for weakness. But the letter she filed proved I was wrong. She hadn't just questioned my work. She'd questioned my character, the one thing I'd built my whole life around. There's a kind of betrayal that doesn't make you shout. It just leaves you standing still, realizing every sacrifice you made was invisible to the people who should have seen it first. That was the morning I stopped protecting their comfort, and none of them, not my sister, not my parents, had any idea what would happen once I finally spoke. The waiting room at Randolph Air Base looked like every other room designed to drain a person of warmth. Metal chairs, sterile walls, a clock that sounded too loud for its own good. Yet that morning, every tick seemed to count down something bigger than time. It was counting down what was left of my dignity. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant and metal, that familiar scent of bureaucracy pretending to be order. I'd sat in hundreds of rooms like this before, reading reports, signing directives, holding my breath through someone else's mistakes. But this time, the mistake had my name on it. Through the glass door, I could see the hearing chamber, bright lights, polished table, 3 officers seated like carved figures, motionless. At the center, Colonel Benjamin Mercer. I hadn't said his name aloud in years, but the sight of him carried the weight of dust-covered memories I'd kept sealed in the back of my mind. Kabul, 2014. Fire, smoke, orders yelled through static, his voice cutting through chaos like a line of steel. A junior officer opened the door. "They're ready for you." My legs moved before my heart did. Inside, the air was colder, tighter. The hum of fluorescent lights buzzed above my head. On the opposite side of the table stood Melissa, my sister, flawless posture, navy blazer, hair pinned with precision. In her hand, a thick folder. The sound of her voice when she began was measured, official, almost rehearsed. The discrepancies involve deployment timelines and commendation records. Together, they suggest intentional misrepresentation. No tremor, no hesitation. She didn't even glance my way. I watched her lips move the way a stranger might watch a broadcast, detached, analytical, waiting for the words to stop hurting. I'd imagined a lot of things over the years. Arguments, reconciliations, even the chance that one day we might sit at the same table again without resentment between us. I never imagined this. The military always prided itself on being a family. But as I stood there, facing both the institution that built me and the blood relative determined to break me, I realized families, of any kind, can be equally unforgiving. Mercer leaned forward. His uniform looked sharper than I remembered. His voice, when he spoke, was deliberate. "Sergeant Stanton, do you wish to respond?" My throat felt dry. Every instinct urged me to defend myself, to throw every procedural code I knew back across that table. Instead, I straightened my back, met his eyes, and said, "No, sir." The silence that followed was thick enough to hear. A pen clicked somewhere. Someone exhaled too loudly. I kept my eyes steady. Not answering wasn't surrender. It was control, the kind I'd learned from years of watching people mistake composure for guilt. Truth doesn't need a guardian. It only needs time. And time, unlike people, doesn't lie. I could feel Melissa's impatience from across the room, the restless shift in her chair. She always hated my quiet. She thought it was arrogance. Maybe it was. Or maybe it was the only way I'd ever learned to survive, by waiting long enough for everyone else to reveal who they really were. Mercer flipped through the pages in front of him. His brows drew together, a faint crease forming between them. He paused longer than protocol allowed, scanning one page twice. His eyes lifted toward me, unreadable. Then, without a word, he pushed his chair back and walked out of the room. The door shut behind him with a sound that didn't belong in a military proceeding. It sounded personal. The officers exchanged uncertain glances. Melissa frowned, shifting the folder to her other hand. I didn't move. For a few seconds, all I heard was the ticking, the same steady rhythm that had followed me through every deployment, every briefing, every lonely night between flights. My father's old watch, still keeping perfect time, long after he stopped believing in anything that required it. I stared down at it now. The face scratched but reliable, its hands moving forward without apology. It was the one thing in the room that hadn't turned against me. When I looked up again, Melissa was watching me at last. Not with triumph, not with anger, just curiosity, as if she couldn't understand how I was still standing. I didn't give her the satisfaction of blinking first. The clock on the wall hit the next minute with a sharp click, the sound slicing through the room like a blade. And I realized, with an odd sense of calm, that whatever happened next had already begun long before this hearing ever did. Mercer's chair sat empty. My sister's evidence lay heavy on the table, and I, for the first time in years, wasn't afraid of what silence might cost me. Because sometimes silence isn't retreat. It's the sound a person makes right before everything changes. Mercer came back after 10 minutes, though it felt longer. The air inside the room had thickened in his absence, every breath heavier, more deliberate. He didn't look at anyone when he returned, just took his seat, straightened a folder, and spoke in that measured, restrained tone that could freeze a room. We'll be reviewing the chain of custody for all referenced records. No one moved. A phrase like that in a military hearing was a quiet bomb. It meant someone's evidence wasn't as clean as it looked. I could almost hear the tension shift toward Melissa. She didn't seem to notice. Her voice stayed steady, practiced. Her deployment in March 2014 overlaps with a stateside assignment. That's impossible unless the record was edited later. I stayed still. Stillness wasn't surrender. It was my language. I'd learned long ago that silence made people show their hands faster than pressure ever could. Mercer opened his laptop, the light of the screen flashing across his face. His fingers moved fast, precise. He typed a few commands, then stopped, eyes flicking up to Melissa. Ms. Stanton, where did you obtain your data? From the Defense Contractor Access Portal, she answered quickly. Secondary source, he said, voice almost quiet enough to miss, not certified. The room changed shape in that instant. One of the panel officers looked up sharply, his pen hovering mid-air, before he started writing furiously. Mercer leaned back slightly, his expression unreadable. We'll pull the primary orders directly from archive, he said. Melissa's confidence cracked just a little. She straightened her collar, the gesture small but telling. Those records are supposed to match, she insisted. They were verified. We'll see, Mercer replied. There was something in the way he said it, unhurried, almost calm, that told me this wasn't about verification anymore. It was about exposure. The real hearing had just begun. Melissa placed her stack of documents down a little too hard, the edges scraping against the polished table. As she did, I noticed something in the corner of one page, a faint gray watermark, circular, with an eagle insignia above it, not the regular departmental seal. This one belonged to the Pentagon. A chill ran through me, not from fear, but from recognition. She couldn't have accessed those files alone. Someone above her clearance level had handed her that key. Someone wanted her to have it. I looked at Mercer. His eyes met mine for a brief, sharp second. He'd seen it too. No words passed between us, but I knew he was calculating the same question I was. Who would risk giving a civilian employee Pentagon-sourced data? The silence between each exchange became its own dialogue. I could feel the hum of the lights, the scrape of pens, the pulse behind my ribs that refused to slow. Mercer flipped through the papers again. Slower this time, as if tracing something familiar. Halfway down the stack, he stopped. His thumb rested on a handwritten note at the bottom of one page. His gaze froze. Filed under emergency authorization, B. Mercer! I exhaled without meaning to. He didn't say anything. His expression didn't change much. But the shift was there, a quiet tightening around his eyes, a recognition that wasn't surprise so much as memory surfacing. My father once said a man's handwriting gives him away more than his voice ever could. Watching Mercer stare at his own signature from 10 years ago, I finally understood what he meant. He glanced up again, but this time there was something heavier in his look, not accusation, not sympathy. It was the look of a man realizing the past he'd locked away was standing across from him, wearing a uniform and refusing to break. No one else in the room seemed to catch it. The private exchange buried beneath the stillness. But I knew what that moment was. Recognition. Of the file. Of me. Of everything that was supposed to stay buried under red tape and dust. Mercer closed the folder. The sound crisp. Final. "We'll reconvene once the archive responds," he said, voice steady again. But his hands weren't steady anymore. Melissa nodded. Confident again, not realizing the shift that had just occurred. She believed she had the room. She didn't see the tremor ripple beneath it. When the panel dismissed us, I stood, the chair legs scraping against the floor like a warning bell. My sister gathered her papers quickly, avoiding my eyes. For a moment, I almost pitied her. She had no idea what kind of storm she'd stepped into, or who else it was already swallowing. As we filed out, Mercer's voice cut through the low murmur. "Sergeant Stanton, remain seated." I froze. He waited until the door closed behind Melissa and the others before he spoke again. Quietly. "That file," he paused, choosing his words carefully. It was never meant to exist in digital form. I met his gaze, steady. Yet here we are. For the first time since he walked back into my life, Mercer didn't look like a commanding officer. He looked like a man who knew exactly how much truth could destroy a career and was deciding whether to let it. Outside, I could hear the faint echo of footsteps in the corridor. The hearing was officially adjourned, but something else had begun, something that had nothing to do with military procedure. And when I finally stepped out into the hallway, the lights above flickered once, just once, but long enough to remind me that even in the brightest rooms, some shadows never leave. I never forgot Kabul. Some memories don't fade. They burn. Leave a trace under the skin that no time can dull. The explosion started with a low rumble, a sound like the earth taking a breath before it tore itself open. I remember standing at the convoy checkpoint, heat rising off the tarmac, when the sky lit up orange. The fuel depot, our depot, was engulfed within seconds. Smoke climbed fast, black and endless, curling against the horizon. Radios screamed. Vehicles veered in chaos. Men shouted orders that overlapped and canceled one another. The chain of command dissolved in the noise. In less than a minute, I knew what was about to happen. The entire supply line, the one feeding our operations across 3 regions, was about to stall. And waiting for approval wasn't an option. I was the logistics officer on the ground, the only one left capable of signing the emergency release to reroute supplies through another depot. 60 seconds to decide whether to break protocol or let everything collapse. Mercer's voice cut through static, sharp and pained. He was down, injured somewhere near the outer fence. I can still hear it in my head, low and ragged. "Do what you have to, Stanton." So I did, I signed, and 3 hours later, the system was back online. Convoys moved again. No one died. No one even questioned it at first. When I handed in the physical log later that night, smudged, smoke-stained, with my initials across the bottom, it should have been uploaded into the network. But the comms hub had been offline for maintenance. The data never made it to the official record. By the time we were back stateside, someone had rewritten the report without that page. They called it a technical error. I called it the one decision I never apologized for. That's what I carried home from Kabul, the understanding that saving lives doesn't always make you look innocent on paper. Now, sitting in the present-day hearing room, I listened as my sister's voice tried to erase that night entirely. She spoke of fabricated missions, of inflated commendations. She spoke as if that fire, that decision, that signature All of it had existed only in my imagination. I wanted to laugh. Or maybe I wanted to walk out before I had to watch the people who should have known better nod along. Instead, I stayed seated, my hands folded on the table, my face steady. She didn't know, or maybe she didn't want to know, that the real report, the physical one with Mercer's handwriting and my signature beneath it, was still buried somewhere inside Vault 6, the archive no one bothered to visit anymore. Mercer's eyes found mine from across the table. His expression was calm, but there was something searching in it, like a man digging through layers of memory he thought he'd sealed off years ago. Then he asked, quietly enough that even the clerk barely caught it, "Sergeant Stanton, are you confident your record is complete?" I met his gaze. "It's accurate, sir, even if incomplete." He didn't reply right away. The pause stretched. Then he gave a single nod. That was all. But in the military, a single nod can carry a whole sentence's worth of meaning. He understood what I was really saying. He stood suddenly, breaking the stillness. 10-minute recess, he announced. The room shifted with the scrape of chairs. As he passed me on his way out, his stride slowed. "That file shouldn't even exist digitally," he muttered, barely moving his lips. "Yet it does," I answered under my breath. "Someone wanted it to." He hesitated for a fraction of a second, then kept walking. I stayed seated until the room emptied, my pulse steady, the hum of fluorescent lights filling the space Mercer left behind. My sister moved past me, stacking her documents neatly, efficient as ever. She didn't look back. She didn't have to. She thought she'd already won. But as I sat there, I started to see the outlines of something larger than her ambition, something colder. Melissa wasn't the one pulling this. She didn't even realize she was holding a match that someone else had already lit. Someone higher, someone who knew how to twist access privileges and make data lie. I leaned back, my eyes on the digital screen still glowing at the end of the table. The defense logo pulsed faintly on the corner. The same insignia I'd seen stamped on her folder. A Pentagon seal, authorization far above her rank. And then it clicked. Whoever had tampered with that file hadn't just found an opening. They'd used my sister as a weapon, turning her into the perfect credible accuser. When the hearing resumed, I said nothing. The less I spoke, the more obvious their maneuvering became. Words would only make me part of their performance. Mercer's absence stretched longer than expected. Officers exchanged glances. Whispers spread at the back of the room. Melissa adjusted her blazer and pretended not to notice. Finally, the door opened. Mercer walked in, his expression unreadable, his step deliberate. He didn't return to his seat immediately. He stood by the window for a few seconds, as if collecting himself. When he finally sat, the air shifted. Something in him had hardened. He didn't address me or Melissa. He simply closed his laptop, folded his hands, and said, "We'll proceed later. The archive will be consulted directly." The words meant nothing to most people in the room, but to me, they landed heavy. Archive meant Vault 6. Vault 6 meant paper. And paper, unlike pixels, couldn't be rewritten. When we were dismissed, I gathered my folder slowly. My hands were steady, but inside, something had started to tighten, a sense of motion beneath calm water. As I walked toward the door, my reflection caught in the glass. Just beyond it, in the hallway, Melissa was standing with a man in a gray suit, civilian, badge on his lapel. Consultant. I didn't need to read the name tag to know who he was. Harland Pierce. The last time I'd seen that face was years ago, across a conference table lined with audit documents and redacted numbers. I had turned those numbers over to investigators myself. That report had ended his career in procurement, or so I thought. Now he was back, smiling, shaking my sister's hand like an old ally. My chest tightened, not from fear, but from recognition. This wasn't about personal vengeance. It wasn't even about family anymore. This was a cleanup operation disguised as discipline, and I was the last piece of evidence they hadn't destroyed. Pierce glanced toward the hearing room. Just once. His gaze passed over the glass where I stood, and for the briefest moment, our eyes met. His smile didn't change. I stepped aside, letting the door close between us, the faint reflection of his face dissolving into my own. I'd faced worse things than men in suits and sealed corridors. But standing there, with the echo of Kabul still burning in my memory, I understood something I hadn't before. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a design, and I was about to become the problem they couldn't delete. The drive to Dallas took 3 hours, but it felt like I was crossing a decade of silence. The closer I got to my parents' house, the heavier the air felt, thick with all the words we never said, and the ones that had been said too late. The house hadn't changed. The same flag still hung by the porch, bleached from years of sun. Inside, the air smelled of lemon polish and antiseptic, the scent of control. My mother moved around the kitchen, wiping an already spotless counter, her motions crisp and rehearsed. My father sat at the end of the table, posture as straight as it was the day he retired. The silver ring he never took off caught the light with every twitch of his hand. I sat down without being invited. The table gleamed, a battlefield disguised as furniture. No one looked directly at me. For a while, the only sound was the faint clink of glass against porcelain. Then my mother spoke first, her voice soft, polite, rehearsed, like she'd practiced it in her head all morning. "Melissa doesn't hate you," she said. "She's just doing her job." I stared at the papers spread across the table. Among the neatly stacked mail and newspaper clippings, there it was, a notarized affidavit, signed by my mother. I knew the format before I read the text. Her signature at the bottom, the words, "Reviewed records provided by departmental compliance." A supporting statement for the inquiry. I asked, quietly, "Did you read what you signed?" Her eyes dropped to the floor. "Your sister said it was just formal." The word formal landed like a punch. Formal was what people said when they wanted to betray someone without feeling guilty about it. My father's sigh filled the silence. "I helped her get that job. You know, thought she'd follow your steps, make us proud again." That word, again, lodged somewhere between my ribs. Proud again, as if pride had been suspended since Kabul, as if everything I'd done since then had been a shadow of what I ruined. I didn't ask him proud of what, because I knew. He wasn't talking about the mission, or the aftermath, or the silence that followed. He was talking about the moment I stopped being the kind of soldier he could boast about. I set my coffee down and looked straight at him. "She's being used. Dad. This isn't her fight." He didn't even flinch. "And you think yours was?" he said. "You embarrassed this family once. Don't do it again." The words came out of me before I could stop them. I didn't embarrass the family. I embarrassed the people who thought rules were more important than lives. That ended it. The air in the room turned sharp, cold. My father stood up, back still straight, eyes fixed on nothing. My mother kept her gaze low, her hands trembling as she reached for another glass that didn't need cleaning. "If you could just explain what happened in Kabul," she said, barely above a whisper. "You wouldn't believe me," I said. "You already chose who to believe." The silence after that wasn't new. It was the same silence that had lived in this house for years. Polite, well-behaved, fatal. When I finally stood to leave, my eyes caught a flash of white sticking out from my mother's purse. I reached for it before she could. A business card, crisp, expensive, embossed letters, Harlan Pierce, defense legal consultant. "Where did you get this?" She froze. "He called. Said he was helping Melissa clear things up." I turned the card over, running my thumb across the raised print. It was real. Pierce always preferred tangible proof of his influence. I set the card back down, nodded once, and walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. The sunlight outside felt too bright, the air too dry. I got into my car, shut the door, and just sat there for a moment, both hands gripping the wheel. I stared at the house, the white siding, the carefully trimmed bushes, the flag barely moving in the heat. They still believed in the idea of order, of loyalty tied neatly to hierarchy. To them, authority was never wrong, just misunderstood. They'd forgotten that truth doesn't need rank to exist. As I started the engine, my phone vibrated against the console. A new email. No sender listed, no subject line. Just one sentence. You were never in Kabul, not officially. Drop it. My thumb hovered over the screen. For a moment, the hum of the car engine filled the space. Steady, mechanical. The kind of sound that could almost trick you into thinking the world still made sense. I read the line again. You were never in Kabul. I smiled, slow and bitter. If I was never there, why were they so afraid I might prove it? Outside, the sky stretched pale and cloudless, the color of paper waiting to be rewritten. I pulled onto the road and didn't look back. That house had stopped feeling like home a long time ago. Now, it felt like evidence. When I walked back into the hearing room at Randolph, it was no longer the same space I'd left. The air felt heavier, charged with quiet intent. The rows behind the panel were no longer empty. 2 new observers sat there in dark suits, their notepads unopened, their attention fixed on Mercer. They didn't introduce themselves, but I didn't need them to. The way they watched, the way they didn't blink, I knew exactly whose eyes they represented. Harlan Pierce didn't like to miss a show, even when he watched it through other people. Mercer's tone had changed too. The edge of protocol was still there, but underneath it was something new, a weariness, or maybe a warning. We'll now examine the source data. The technician tapped a few keys. The projector hummed to life, spilling cold light across the wall. A line of text appeared, sharp against the white screen. File created, 2014-04-12. Modified, 2015-10-05. Edited by, redacted. Mercer leaned forward, hands clasped. Ms. Stanton, do you recognize this? Melissa straightened, her tone clipped. It's the record from the defense portal. Mercer's eyes didn't leave the screen. Then explain the edit. The silence that followed stretched thin. You could feel the air leave the room. Melissa hesitated, eyes darting toward the observers, before she answered. Contractor data updates automatically. Not without authorization, Mercer said evenly. His words landed like a quiet verdict. Somewhere in the back, a pen stopped moving. No one spoke. Even the air conditioning sounded louder, unnatural. I stayed silent. In hearings like these, silence wasn't submission, it was gravity. It made the truth heavy enough to surface on its own. The technician's fingers moved again. Another window opened, this time a subfolder. Inside it was a file labeled Attachment A, Visual Documentation. He double-clicked. A photograph filled the screen. Me, covered in soot, uniform torn, standing in front of the burning fuel depot in Kabul. Smoke behind me, a cracked helmet hanging from one hand, clipboard in the other. At the corner, the faint stamp of an internal network. AF, News, Internal Bulletin. April 2014. My breath caught. The picture wasn't staged. It had been taken mid-chaos, before the flames were even contained. I remembered the moment, the noise, the smell, the reporter who'd risked getting close enough to snap it before being pulled away. I'd forgotten that image ever existed. Apparently, the system hadn't. Mercer turned his head toward me. That's you. Yes, sir. In Kabul. Yes, sir. My sister shot up from her chair so fast it scraped the floor. That's not part of the file. Mercer didn't even raise his voice. No, but it's part of history. The room stayed utterly still. The 2 observers exchanged a glance, but didn't move. The image on the wall glowed between us, undeniable and unedited. Mercer stood slowly, closing the folder in front of him with deliberate care. He turned to the panel. We'll suspend proceedings until the primary physical record is retrieved. The words rippled through the room. To anyone outside the system, it might have sounded procedural, but I knew what it meant. He'd just ordered a cross-verification with the original hard copy, something almost never done, especially not for a case like this. It was an act of rebellion disguised as protocol. As Mercer shut the binder, his gaze caught mine. For a moment, the mask slipped, and I saw the weight of something he hadn't said yet. He leaned closer as he gathered his papers. voice low enough that only I heard it. The handwriting in the corner. It's mine. I held his stare, answering just as quietly. Then, maybe you already know who changed it. He didn't flinch, but I could see the truth settle in. There was no need to say Pierce's name. It hung between us, as sharp and corrosive as acid. The hearing adjourned without another word. Chairs scraped, papers shuffled, and people moved like they were afraid to make eye contact with either of us. Melissa kept her focus on her tablet, her jaw tight, pretending she wasn't unraveling. I stayed seated until the room cleared. The photo still burned behind my eyes. The flames, the motion, the proof that refused to die quietly. When Mercer finally turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of his phone in his hand. He typed a short message, thumb steady despite the tremor I knew he was fighting. I couldn't read it from where I sat, but I didn't need to. The faint reflection on the screen showed 3 words. Check Vault 6. Then he walked out. It was a small act, almost invisible, but I recognized the cost of it. He was betting his career on a file no one wanted to see again. As the door shut, I exhaled for the first time in what felt like hours. The sound of the projector cooling filled the silence, a slow, mechanical sigh. Outside, footsteps echoed down the hallway, fading one by one until I was alone. I looked back at the darkened screen. The faint imprint of the photo still ghosted on the wall. Paper trails and digital shadows. That's what this was now. A war fought not with weapons, but with edits, deletions, and signatures that refused to disappear. And somewhere, buried in that vault, was the truth written in Mercer's own hand. The truth Pierce had spent years trying to erase. I picked up my father's old watch from the table where I'd set it down earlier, listening to its steady tick. Each second felt heavier than the last, counting not time, but resolve. They wanted silence. They wanted the record clean, simple, rewritten. But they forgot one thing. I was there. And as long as I remembered, so did the system. I walked out into the corridor, the door clicking shut behind me. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, sterile and bright. Down the hall, the 2 observers were whispering to someone on the phone. One of them looked up as I passed, eyes flat, assessing. I kept walking. I'd spent years learning how to move through hostile spaces without letting fear dictate my pace. This was no different. By the time I reached the exit, Mercer's words replayed in my mind, low, controlled, unshakable. The handwriting in the corner, it's mine. And I realized what he was really saying, not just that he remembered, but that he was done pretending he didn't. Outside, the Texas sun hit hard, glaring against the windshield of my car. I sat for a moment before starting the engine, letting the light burn the image of that photograph deeper into memory. Proof was never just evidence. Sometimes it was an echo, and sometimes the echo was louder than the original sound. The message came just after midnight. No sender, no subject line, just a single line of text on a blank screen. Stop digging, or your sister loses her clearance too. I stared at it for a long time, the glow from the phone slicing through the dark of my apartment. The rain outside hadn't started yet, but I could hear the air pressing against the windows, thick with the kind of stillness that comes before a storm. I knew that tone, short, cold, absolute. It was the language of men who'd learned to control people not through bullets, but through access. I didn't delete it. I didn't reply either. There was no point. The kind of person who sends a message like that doesn't expect a response. They expect obedience. By morning, the silence felt heavier than sleep. I left early and drove through the drizzle to Mercer's office on base. He looked worse than I'd ever seen him. Eyes shadowed, shirt wrinkled, a cup of coffee untouched on his desk. "You shouldn't have come," he said, not looking up from the papers in front of him. "You told me to check Vault 6. And you did?" "Not yet. But someone doesn't want me to." That got his attention. He sat back, finally meeting my eyes. For a long moment, he didn't speak. Then he sighed, low and tired, like a man who's been holding his breath for too many years. "You're not the one on trial anymore, Valerie. They're using this to test how far I'll go." He turned the coffee cup absently, the ceramic scraping against the desk. I watched the movement, steady and distracted, the rhythm of someone trying to buy time before telling the truth. He'd traced the access log back, he said. The person who granted Melissa clearance to the restricted database wasn't a systems error. It was deliberate. It led to a name we both knew, Harland Pierce. Pierce, the same man who'd stood in my sister's corner during the hearing. The same man I'd filed against years ago in the Kabul procurement inquiry, when I found irregularities in military supply contracts. Back then, his career had survived the scandal by shedding a few layers of accountability, like a snake losing its skin. I should have known he'd resurface eventually. Mercer's voice dropped lower. He's on the Defense Audit Board now. He can erase a record from existence. Valerie, the kind of erase that doesn't leave metadata behind. He paused. He wants your Kabul report gone. If you fall, the record falls with you. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I understood. This wasn't a case anymore. It was a burial. They were burying memory and data, rewriting what had already been lived. I reached into my bag and placed an envelope on the desk. Mercer looked at it, then at me. Inside was a printout, slightly yellowed, edges worn from years of being folded and unfolded. The Air Force Internal Bulletin, April 2014. The same photo that had resurfaced in the hearing, the one of me standing in front of the burning depot. I kept the hard copy. I said, because I never trusted systems built by men like Pierce. Mercer's mouth tightened, not quite a smile, but close enough to count. He unfolded the paper, scanning it like a man reacquainting himself with a ghost. Vault 6 still has physical backups, he said eventually, but once they digitize it next month, it'll be gone. I finished for him. Exactly. His eyes flicked toward the blinds, as though someone might be listening from the other side of the wall. The rain had started by then, faint but steady. You didn't hear this from me, he said quietly, leaning forward. But Pierce already requested Vault 6's early digitization, tomorrow. For a moment, neither of us moved. The air between us seemed to hum. Tomorrow. That was how close it was. Mercer reached into his drawer, pulled out a small folded slip of paper, and slid it across the desk. I opened it, 6 characters written in his precise, sharp handwriting. Level Delta. If you want the truth to live, get there before they erase it, he said. The weight of the note felt heavier than paper should. And what happens to you if I do? I asked. He gave a quiet laugh. The kind that doesn't reach the eyes, doesn't matter, he said. I signed it once. I'll sign it again. I tucked the code into my jacket pocket. Outside, thunder rolled far off in the distance. Mercer's expression changed for the briefest second. Something like relief. Or maybe resignation. I couldn't tell. He looked older than I remembered. Not from years, but from carrying the kind of guilt that never got written into official reports. When I left the office, the rain had become a downpour. Texas rain doesn't fall often, but when it does, it doesn't hold back. Sheets of water blurred the road, washed over the base like the sky was trying to wipe something clean. I stood under the overhang for a moment before heading to my car. The level Delta code folded tight in my palm. I could feel the ink bleeding slightly into my skin. Through the noise of the rain, Mercer's last words echoed in my mind. The truth survives through whoever refuses to edit it. It wasn't just a statement, it was a warning. The truth doesn't die easily, but it needs someone to bleed for it. As I started the car, wipers fighting against the storm, I realized I was done waiting for someone else to protect what mattered. They wanted to erase history. I was going to make sure they couldn't. Every mile between me and Vault 6 felt like borrowed time. By morning, the storm had passed, but the world outside looked rinsed clean. Too bright, too sharp. Randolph Air Base gleamed under the Texas sun, the kind of glare that made metal seem alive. The brightness didn't reach the hearing room, though, inside. The air was still thick, the tension metallic, the kind that sticks to your tongue. Mercer opened the session with his voice flat. Steady. We are reopening the chain of custody verification for all accessed files. It was the kind of announcement that didn't just change the temperature of the room, it changed the ground beneath it. The technician moved to the screen, projecting a set of digital logs. Lines of text scrolled in government font, clean and merciless. User, M. Stanton access, classified Tier 3 file, Epsilon 27A. Authorization, borrowed clearance. Origin traced to H. Pierce, DOD, legal advisor. No one spoke. The air thinned to silence. The hum of the projector sounded almost intrusive, like it shouldn't be allowed to exist in that moment. Then Melissa stood, her chair scraping the floor. Her voice cracked. The first crack I'd heard in her since this started. That can't be right. He said it was temporary. Mercer didn't even look up from the screen. Temporary access doesn't exist at Tier 3. His tone was so even it cut sharper than anger. I watched her, my sister, shoulders stiff, panic beginning to show in her breathing. I didn't feel satisfaction, not anger either. Just a dull, hollow ache. She truly believed she'd been helping, that she was fixing something broken. What she never learned, and what Pierce had counted on, is that people who want to bury the truth always make you feel like you're saving it. Mercer made a small hand motion to the clerk. The session was suspended. He called for an independent audit. Officially, it meant transparency. In reality, it meant escalation. As people began to file out, Mercer leaned slightly in my direction. His voice barely carried over the noise. Whatever happens next, stay out of it. I met his eyes. You know I won't. He didn't argue. He just looked away. The kind of look that says he already knows how the story ends and doesn't like it. Outside in the corridor, the air felt cooler, cleaner, false relief. I walked toward the exit, only to hear my father's voice echoing down the hall, low and deliberate. He was standing near the vending machine, speaking with one of the attorneys from the Inspector General's office. The man's ID badge caught the light, the same department that employed Pierce. I stopped just short of the corner. If she keeps pushing this, my father said, the Cobble report resurfaces. That'll ruin us all. For a second, I couldn't move. The words hung there like a verdict. Ruin us all. Not ruin the truth. Not ruin the record. Us. I stepped around the corner. The lawyer turned away immediately, pretending to check his phone. My father froze. Valerie, listen. No. You listen. You didn't check. You just protected what looked right. He stared at me, his mouth half open, but nothing came out. The hallway light reflected off his ring, the same one that used to mean integrity to me. Now it just looked like armor. He didn't defend himself. He didn't have to. The silence did it for him, heavy and final. I walked away before I could see him turn his back. Some things don't need to be witnessed twice. By the time I reached my car, the sun was already high, burning through the haze. I drove without turning the radio on, without thinking much at all. Every mile felt like a reminder that family could be both the first place you belong and the first place you're exiled from. That night, I came home to quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't feel natural. I unlocked the door, flicked on the light, and noticed it right away, a thin white envelope lying just inside, as if it had been slipped through the gap. No markings, no return address. I picked it up carefully. Inside were photographs. The first one was of me, standing in front of Vault 6, the night I'd gone there, my car in the background, my shadow cast by the motion light. The timestamp on the bottom corner read 23:04. My stomach went cold. The second photo was taken from a different angle, through the glass window of the vault's entrance. In the reflection, I could see myself bent slightly over the keypad, but behind me, faintly, another shape, a person's outline, a hand raised, holding a phone. I set the picture down on the table, staring at it under the lamp. The angle, the distance, the light, everything matched perfectly with the night I'd been there. But I hadn't seen anyone. The reflection in the glass was clear enough to tell one thing. Whoever it was, they'd been inside the vault before me. I traced the edge of the photo with my thumb. The paper was standard issue, government-grade matte, the kind used in internal reports. Not a personal camera, not a threat meant to scare me off. This was a record. Someone had gone in first. Someone had already begun to wipe the trail clean. I sat there for a long time. The photos spread across the table. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere in the distance, fading fast. The clock on the wall ticked, too loud, too precise. For a moment, I thought of Mercer's warning, his tired voice echoing through the storm. The truth survives through whoever refuses to edit it. I looked at the reflection in the photo again. Me on one side of the glass, the shadow on the other, the line between us razor thin. Maybe that was what this had always been, not a fight over data, or guilt, or protocol, but over who gets to hold the version that survives. And if someone thought they could erase mine, they'd underestimated how far a woman who's already lost everything will go to keep one page of history intact. The rain came in slow, deliberate sheets that night. Texas rain. The kind that feels earned after months of heat. It slicked the roads, turned the air electric. I drove alone, the wipers keeping rhythm with my pulse, every mile pulling me closer to the edge of something irreversible. Vault 6 sat on the outskirts of the base, behind two fences and a line of floodlights that looked like stars forced to stay grounded. It wasn't built to impress. Just a squat concrete warehouse, where the Defense Department stored what it no longer trusted the digital world to remember. The guard booth was empty. The rain must have driven them inside. Or maybe someone made sure I'd have the place to myself. I didn't question it. I swiped the level Delta card Mercer had given me. The scanner glowed green, then released the lock with a heavy metallic sigh, as though the past itself had just agreed to open. Inside, the air was dense with dust and paper and history, the scent of ink long dried, carbon and cardboard and time. I took out the flashlight and followed the rows, each shelf labeled in faded stencils. Operations, contracts, deployment logs, emergency directives. Every few steps, the motion sensors clicked the lights on in narrow bursts, revealing flashes of white folders and dull metal. My boots echoed off the floor, the sound swallowed almost immediately. Epsilon 27A. The tag was half peeled off, hanging from the edge of a beige cabinet that had probably been forgotten since the last reorganization. My hand hesitated over the handle, then I pulled. The drawer resisted at first, stuck from years of neglect, then slid open with a groan that cut through the silence like a wound reopening. Files lined the drawer, crisp edges yellowed with age. I traced along the spine until I found it. A thin folder with my handwriting. The date, April 2014, and the faint red stamp filed under emergency authorization. I sat down on the cold concrete floor, folder open on my knees. The first page was fragile, nearly translucent. At the bottom, I saw it, Mercer's signature, written in that tight, deliberate script I'd know anywhere. Authorized under field emergency, B. Mercer. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. This single line was everything, proof that I hadn't forged anything, that the mission had been real. But it also meant Mercer had broken the chain of command that day. He'd done it to save lives, mine, and countless others. But on paper, it was still an infraction that could end him. I let the page rest against my knees, rain hammering the roof above. The sound was steady, almost mechanical. I'd lived my whole life by rules written by men like Mercer and Pierce, rules that pretended fairness was the same as justice. If I handed this over, I would clear my name. If I handed this over, I would destroy his. That's the thing about truth. It rarely saves everyone. The phone in my pocket buzzed. The screen lit up with a message from an unknown number. Vault 6 cameras active. Leave it. Someone was watching. I stood slowly, scanning the corners of the room. The red light of a security lens blinked high above the door. It wasn't unusual. The vaults were always under surveillance. What wasn't usual was that it was on at this hour. They knew I was here. I folded the document carefully, slid it into a waterproof case from my bag, and sealed it shut. My voice came out steady. Low. No. The truth doesn't get left behind. I stepped to the small radio unit mounted by the door, pressed the emergency channel, and spoke into it with the calm precision that years in uniform had drilled into me. This is Consultant Stanton. I'm transferring secured evidence under Code Delta, per Colonel Mercer's authorization. The message clicked through the line. There was no turning back after that. The second I said those words, the system had me on record as the courier. Every move from here would be logged. I turned off the light, opened the door, and stepped into the night. The rain had stopped. The air was cooler, washed clean, but the ground still glistened with puddles that reflected the white glare of my headlights. I locked the vault behind me and walked toward the car, the folder pressed tight under my arm. Somewhere above the clouds, lightning flashed, silent and distant. By the time I reached the car, I could feel sweat sticking to my neck, cold against the night air. I started the engine, headlights slicing through the mist. The wet road shimmered like glass as I pulled forward. That's when I saw it. The shape of another car, parked a few hundred yards back near the access road. Gray government-issue sedan. It hadn't been there when I arrived. Its lights were off, engine silent, but I could see the outline of someone sitting inside, waiting. I didn't move right away, just sat with my hands on the wheel, breathing slow, watching the faint movement of the windshield wipers on the other car. They weren't wiping rain. They were just moving, rhythmic, mechanical, someone making a point. The truth was never safe, Mercer had said. But then again, neither was silence. I rolled down the window, letting the cool air rush in, and looked back through the rearview mirror. The silver sedan stayed still, a dull reflection of the floodlights glinting off its hood. I smiled. Not because I wasn't afraid, but because I finally understood the rules of this game. If you're watching, I said softly to the mirror, watch carefully. This is how truth travels. Then I pressed the accelerator. The tires hissed over the wet pavement, the taillights slicing 2 red lines through the dark. Behind me, Vault 6 disappeared into the rain-soaked distance, but in my passenger seat, the folder sat quiet and heavy, the kind of silence that carried weight, the kind of silence that, once broken, could never be contained again. By morning, the rain had vanished, leaving the sky scrubbed raw, sharp enough to sting the eyes. The base looked deceptively calm, as if the storm had taken everything noisy with it. Inside the disciplinary chamber, though, the silence carried weight, the kind of silence that knows what's coming. When I walked in, every seat was filled. Uniforms, suits, the polished brass of authority gleaming under the sterile lights. The white glare above the table sliced through the room like a blade. You could feel the air vibrating, the anticipation of people waiting to see which version of the truth would survive. Mercer was already there. He looked smaller somehow, as if the night had carved new lines into his face. His eyes met mine briefly, not as command to subordinate, but as acknowledgement of risk, of consequence, of shared complicity. I set the waterproof case on the table and unlatched it. No words. The sound of the clasp releasing was loud in that room. Too loud. I handed the file to the clerk, who passed it to Mercer. He didn't speak right away. He just opened it, glanced at the first page, and the noise of the world faded to nothing. The paper rustled softly as he turned each sheet, that small, familiar sound becoming the only proof that time was still moving forward. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, stripped of pretense. Mission Epsilon 27A, completed under emergency field authorization. All signatures are authentic. No one exhaled. The sentence seemed to suspend the air itself. Across the room, Melissa shot to her feet, her face drained of color. That can't— You said the record was gone. Mercer's tone didn't rise. It didn't need to. The record was never gone. Ms. Stanton. It was hidden. He turned his gaze toward me. You found it. I shook my head. No, sir. It found me. That was the truth. I hadn't gone looking for redemption. I'd gone looking for accuracy. And somehow, the truth had recognized its last defender. A faint hum from the projector filled the pause that followed. Mercer cleared his throat, addressing the board. His tone shifted back to official cadence, but there was something raw beneath the words. The allegation of falsifying a service record is unsupported by primary documentation. The source file was tampered with after digitization by an unauthorized access granted by Harlan Pierce, the youngest officer at the table, the one who'd spent most of the hearings typing quietly, eyes down, was now gripping his pen so tight it shook. The pen tip scratched the paper unevenly as he tried to keep up. Mercer continued, his voice steady, controlled, but the room itself seemed to tilt with every sentence. Effective immediately, this hearing transitions from disciplinary review to internal audit. The air shifted. The hierarchy of power rearranged itself in real time. Chairs creaked. Someone at the back whispered something into a phone, too low to hear. The case had just turned inside out. Melissa was no longer the accuser. She was the accused. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. The sound of her breath told me enough. Ragged, uncertain. The rhythm of someone realizing too late what line she'd crossed. From the corner of my vision, I could see her shoulders shaking. For a fleeting second, I saw not the woman who had reported me, but the girl who used to follow me around our backyard with scraped knees, wanting to be braver than she was. People think strength is what keeps you standing. They forget that truth is heavier than any lie. It bends your back before it sets you free. Mercer picked up his pen. The tip scratched once, firm and deliberate, across the final page of the record. Then he set it down and looked up, the weight of command suddenly gone from his posture. "Sergeant Stanton," he said softly, "you're cleared." I took a breath, felt it settle low in my chest. I didn't feel triumph, just stillness. "I didn't need to be cleared, sir," I said, just corrected. He gave a small nod, more to himself than to me. Around us, no one clapped, no one even shifted. The silence was complete, absolute, the kind of silence that exists only after truth has finished speaking. Through that stillness, my father's watch ticked faintly in my mind, steady, measured, impartial, each beat identical to the last, reminding me that time doesn't care about justice, only about motion. Mercer signed the last form, the sound of the pen dragging slightly, as if even ink hesitated before catching up to what had just happened. He placed the document in front of the clerk, who took it as though handling something radioactive. For a moment, Mercer didn't move. He just stared at the folder, at his own handwriting, the same signature that had started this mess a decade ago. When he finally looked at me again, there was no apology, no relief, just mutual understanding. We had both carried the cost of this truth, behind me. I heard Melissa whisper something, too soft to catch, but I didn't turn. She wasn't my enemy anymore, just another casualty of the machine that had used her. I gathered my folder, stood up, and stepped back from the table. The chair legs scraped against the tile, sharp and final. The officers began to disperse, the clatter of movement slowly filling the space truth had emptied. Papers shuffled, boots echoed, doors clicked, the machinery of order restarting itself. As I walked out, the overhead lights flickered once, their glow harsh and colorless. Outside the window, the sun was breaking through the last thin layer of cloud. The day looked almost ordinary again, as if nothing extraordinary had just happened inside that room. But I knew better. Some truths don't explode. They arrive quietly, like a single breath released after years of holding it in, and in their stillness, they change everything. When I reached the end of the corridor, I glanced back once. Mercer was still seated, head bowed, one hand resting on the folder as though guarding it. I left him there, surrounded by the paper evidence of both our survival. No applause, no vindication, just the hum of fluorescent light and the memory of a clock that never lied. And for the first time in a very long time, I walked away not lighter, not happier, but exact. A month later, everything looked exactly the same. Same desk, same walls, same hum from the fluorescent lights that never quite went silent. New files, though, fresh folders stacked neatly across the table, each marked with someone else's name, someone else's problem. No one said my name in the hallways anymore. The echo of it had vanished, absorbed by the quiet rhythm of normalcy. No congratulations, no apology, just the natural amnesia of the system, moving on the way it always does. Efficient, impersonal, deliberate. The Pierce investigation had already taken its place in the queue. A new case, a new round of hearings, a new audience pretending the outcome would mean something different this time. I didn't follow it. I'd already seen how truth traveled through the pipeline. Slow, scraped, and sometimes left behind entirely. One afternoon, the light from the window hit the edge of my desk just right, spilling gold across the paperwork. I leaned back, let my eyes wander toward the runway outside. The Texas sun was merciless, glaring off the metal wings of the planes lined up in formation. That light had a way of making everything look honest, even when it wasn't. The email notification came quietly, a soft ping. The name in the inbox made me pause. Mercer, Vault 6 will be permanently digitized next month. It read, "Thought you'd want to know. Some truths need someone to stand guard." I read it twice, then let the message fade to the bottom of the screen. He didn't need to say anything more. We both understood what it meant. The vault would be converted, the old records scanned and shredded, the paper turned into pixels. Maybe that was how it had to be. History translated into light, still fragile, but at least alive somewhere. Outside, a jet took off, the sound rolling deep through the ground beneath me. For a second, it felt like the vibrations synced with my pulse. My family hadn't called, not once. My mother had sent a Christmas card early, unsigned. Melissa had been reassigned to a civilian office in Ohio. They said it was temporary. I knew it wasn't. None of them had apologized, and I didn't need them to. I opened the drawer of my desk and took out the two things that had followed me through all of it: my father's old watch and the metal badge stamped defense consultant. I set them side by side. The ticking was faint, steady. Then I unclipped the badge and slipped it into my pocket. It's not about being trusted, I thought. It's about staying accurate when nobody's watching. For a long moment, I just sat there, listening to the office around me. The muffled voices through the wall, the printer down the hall, the measured rhythm of a place that existed to file, to record, to continue. Another notification appeared in my inbox. No name, no address. Just a blank subject line. Against my better judgment. I opened it. You won this time. The system remembers who fixes it. No threat, no compliment, just a fact. I smiled, then I deleted it. Before shutting down my computer, I opened the last document on my list, typed the final note, and marked it for archive. Case Stanton, closed. I turned off the light. The room went dim, except for the reflection in the glass window. The faint outline of my face, calm, unshaken. No victory, no defeat, just precision. The clean stillness that comes when there's nothing left to defend. I reached for my journal, the one I'd carried through Kabul, through hearings, through silence, and wrote the last line of the story. Truth isn't dramatic, it just survives.